At the beginning of our movie, we see Andy Jones running late for work, and he is the head chef at a high-end restaurant in London. And when he gets there, his restaurant was being inspected by a health inspector. I say it with that accent because it's London, yeah. And the inspector calls Andy for a meeting, and he tells him that his staff is not following protocol. But the main problem is that there's lack of administration, and he tells Andy if he can't do the job, he should just hire someone else. And the inspector gives the restaurant 3 stars and tells Andy that he can get back the 5 stars in 3 months if Andy fixes the ensuing issues. And after the meeting, Andy calls the cooking staff and he starts yelling at them for not doing their job properly. And his co-chef, Carly, tells him to calm down, and Andy apologizes to his staff, and they start getting ready for tonight. And what is tonight, you might ask? It's Christmas Eve today, so the restaurant is overbooked, and the manager, Beth, tells the crew that the celebrity chef Alistair and his date, who's a very high-end food critic, is going to be arriving tonight to see what their restaurant has got. And Andy knows Alistair, and they've worked together before in the past, and Andy's pretty resentful of Alistair because he believes that Alistair took some of his ideas. And come tonight, they open the restaurant, and people are just pouring in, and one guy was planning to propose to his girlfriend, so he goes there first and he gets ready. And he also tells Beth that his girlfriend is allergic to every kind of nut. And Beth calls one of the waitresses and tells her to pass the note to the chef. And Chef Carly is not happy with this, since every request should go according to the system, and she doesn't like how Beth micromanages the employees. And Andy was trying to help out with everything. The dishwasher lady is mad because Jake and the other dishwashers were not here yet, and she didn't know how to wash it alone. And Andy was trying to figure out some kind of way where he can fill all these gaps. And he tells her that he'll give her a break when Jake comes, and Andy's also trying to help the new French chef, who's really struggling to understand English. And while also doing all of this, Andy's also making sure the food for his old friend Alistair and his date Sarah, the very well-known food critic, is as good as it should be. And in a bit, Andy goes to meet with Alistair and Sarah. I don't know why chefs do this, by the way. When they see somebody they know, they go out, they talk to you, and he asks you what's going on and how the food is. But Andy does that, just to make it short. Andy does that, and Sarah tells him not to worry today, as she didn't really come here for work. And Andy and Alistair catch up, and Alistair says that Andy's menu is taken from him, and Andy tells him that it was his idea first, and he leaves on an awkward note. And Beth comes to talk to Andy, and she feels a little angry, and she tells him to stop swearing and get back to work. And Beth goes back to the tables, and she hears 3 customers asking a waitress for a food that isn't on the menu tonight. And they tell her that they're celebrities, so Beth goes to the chefs and she tells them to make the food because these people are high-class people, I guess? Yeah. And Carly's annoyed by this, but she says okay to the order. And Andrea, the waitress, is not having a good day today because some customers were being really mean to her, especially one group of customers that don't like anything that she does. And they send back one of the foods that she's got them and tell her that it's not really cooked right. And when she takes the food back, the chefs also tell her that it's her problem and that the food is actually perfect. And the chef tells her that it's her not doing her job perfectly. And Beth comes and asks why customers are sending back food, and Carly tried to explain that the food is good as it is, and Beth says if the food was good, the customers wouldn't be returning it now, would they? And then Carly loses it, and she starts shouting at Beth, and she tells her that she's unqualified to run this business, and she should learn instead of hoeing her ass on social media. And Andy tries to break the fight, and Beth goes to the bathroom and cries. I guess that hoeing around on social media comment really hit home, huh? So, moving on, Andy brings the food he made to Alistair and Sarah really likes it. But Alistair, obviously, starts complaining, saying the food is a little too simple. What does that even mean? But I guess that's chef talk, you know? They always have something to say. And then Andy gets a phone call from his son, and he leaves to talk to his son, and his son tells him that he got first place on a swimming competition. And Andy tells him that he's really proud of him and that he'll see him soon. And Andy really wanted to be there and see his son win the competition, but he couldn't because you see Andy is divorced, and his wife has full custody because Andy is an alcoholic. And he's really trying his hardest to see his son. But in order to spend quality time with him, he has to get his act together, he has to have a job, and he has to have his own apartment. That's why he moved out of a friend's place and got his own place. And back at the restaurant, everything was still very hectic, and Robin and Frank were planning a date after they go out, Beth tells them to go back to work because there's still so much work to do. And when Andy comes back, Camille, the new French chef, asks him to help her out choose an oil. And she wanted to know which oil to use for her new dish, and he tells her to use the walnut oil. And then Andy goes back to finishing the next course for Alistair and Sarah, and he takes it to their table. And Sarah had to go to the bathroom, and Alistair tells him that his food was really great. And then Alistair confronts Andy and asks him why he hasn't been picking up his calls, and he tells Andy that his TV deal has stopped and his business is going down. And he also tells him that he's gonna need that £200,000 that Andy borrowed. Apparently, Alistair and Andy were too close. And at this point, Andy tells him that he didn't really have that kind of money to repay him with. And Alistair tells him that they can start a business together again, and he can replace Carly, and they can split the profit 70-30. And Alistair also promises Andy that if he agrees to this deal, he could get him back the 5-star review every time. And this is pretty crazy because Alistair is just asking Andy to fire Carly for no reason other than him losing his job and wanting to come work for him. I mean, of course he owes him a lot of money, but firing someone on the spot for no reason, especially if they did nothing wrong, is pretty difficult. And after this, they start talking about their kids a little, and Andy leaves and he goes back to work. And one of the customers, the guy that was proposing to his fiancée, and who told Beth not to put anything nutty in the food, starts freaking out because his fiancée was having an allergic reaction. And when I say she gets an allergic reaction, I mean she immediately starts to swell up everywhere, and they immediately call an ambulance and they take her outside. And her boyfriend starts yelling at Andy, and he tells him that he told the chefs that she's very allergic to nuts. And the ambulance got there pretty shortly, and they take the girl away, and the paramedics tell them that she's gonna be fine. And Alistair comes to Andy, and he comes up with this incredibly evil plan, and he tells Andy to blame this on Carly since she was the main chef for the customers. And Andy calls a meeting in the back of the kitchen and asks who added the nuts on the girls' food when they were specifically told not to do that. And everyone says that they don't know and they didn't do it. They didn't add any nuts. And then he figures out that it was actually him. You remember when that French girl asked him which oil to use? He didn't know it was for the girl who was allergic to nuts, of course, and he told her to use the walnut oil. Walnut. There's still nuts in there. Yeah, so it was technically his fault that this girl ended up in the emergency room. And even though Camille knew not to use nuts, since she was rushing, she didn't remember not to use the walnut oil. So at this point, the only person Andy could blame is himself. And Chef Freeman knows about this, and he was really mad about it, and he calls Andy an alcoholic deadbeat because lately he's been really late to work and he hasn't been paying that much attention. And Andy throws a punch at him, and Carly breaks up the fight and she takes Andy to the side. And this is when Andy tells her that Alistair is trying to blame her for the mistake, and Andy tells her that Alistair wanted him to stab Carly in the back and fire her for something that she didn't do. And this is when Carly really gets upset, and she tells Andy that she's done and she's quitting, and he begs her to stay, and he cries a little as well, but she still leaves and she tells Andy to just take care of himself. And Andy goes back to the bathroom and he starts drinking vodka and he starts doing coke. And he stops for a second and he calls his ex-wife and he begs her to let him see his son. And he also begs her to tell him that he loves him so much and that he'll do everything. He'll stop using drugs, he'll stop abusing alcohol, he'll stop all of that. He even promises to go to rehab if he needs to. And he says all of this and then he closes the phone and he throws away his drugs and he gets out of the room. But when he was walking, he suddenly falls down and he blacks out. And after a few minutes, we hear people shouting Andy's name and telling him to wake up, and they call for help. And that's where the movie ends. A pretty cold and grim ending, but in real life, yeah, this shit happens, guys. And that's it for today, guys. I hope to see you guys on the next recap. Remember to leave a like, leave a comment, subscribe to my channel, please. I'll see you on the next one. Bye.